Yeah, I think if, hypothetically, there's, had to guess, it would probably be functional code that can't be taken down that's doing something, displaying something. So my guess is it's not like one PDF or something. My guess is it'd have to be some sort of, functional code website, something. And if they're motivated enough, if it's awful enough, my guess is then it will be come down to mining, right? Because like banning wallets doesn't do anything, like KYC doesn't do anything, mixers doesn't do anything. So maybe that is when they'll try to control the mining, and maybe they will come after every miner and say, hey, you need to keep an eye out, for these types of ordinal inscriptions, and you can't mine anything that includes this sort of thing, even though, hey, once it's there, it's there. You can't double spend.
Monero Talk is sponsored by Cake Wallet, a trustless, open source wallet that gives you the keys to your crypto. Invoice, donate, and trade your Monero with peace of mind, piece of cake. And by StealthEX, an instant exchange where privacy is a top concern. Go to stealthyex.io to instantly exchange between Monero and 450 plus assets without having to create an account or register, and with no limits, making StealthEX a simple way to purchase Monero with crypto anonymously. Monero Talk is also made possible from contributions by viewers and listeners like you, and supporting us is easier than ever by typing in monerotalk.crypto in your monero.com or Cake Wallet send address field to send us a tip. This week on Monero Talk, Douglas Tuman interviews Ragnar Lifthrasir, an OG Bitcoiner who has increasingly become a staunch supporter of Monero in light of Bitcoin's lack of privacy and fungibility. He is launching a new conference this upcoming year called the Finney Forum, which focuses on Bitcoin privacy tech and Monero. Together, they discuss how Ragnar realized through the gun community some of the flaws of Bitcoin that Monero could fix, what will happen to Bitcoin if the state seizes control, what effect would a ban on Monero have, and could it take Monero adoption to the next level, the drama in the Bitcoin community in contrast to the Monero community's cohesion, doubts about Bitcoin censorship resistance in regards to ocean mining censoring, Samourai wallet and Ordinals, and much more. Monero Talk starts now.
All right. Ragnar, what's going on, man?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me on the show.
I gotta say, I love the name. I love the name. That's a beautiful name. Are you named after somebody in your family? Is that
Well, I do have Scandinavian heritage, but mostly what I get is people ask me if I've seen the show The Vikings. That's the most common response, but yeah, it works.
how much of your heritage is it like a large portion of your background, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's all Northern European, people who don't know too much about like the history of Europe. I mean, it's basically the Northern Germanic tribes. So pretty much anything in Germany, Scandinavia, a lot parts of the UK, it's all kind of the same people, right? Just kind of formerly violent people, who also, some of them have a brain. So that's basically, yeah, my heritage.
You might have some Neanderthal mixed in there. You never know. I think I got some Neanderthal.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the highest concentration of Neanderthal DNA is, I think, Northern Europeans, or at least obviously Europeans, and I certainly act that way sometimes. So yeah.
Who are the Neanderthals in crypto? Is it the Bitcoiners? Is it the Moneros people?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Well, let's see. We killed the Neanderthals. They went out. They were extinct, what, 30,000 years ago, which isn't that long. And a thought experiment is, I always think, what if they were still around?
Yeah.
Like, what would the world be like? I think that's an interesting question. So applying that to like Bitcoin, Monero, I don't know, but it's a cool thought experiment.
Yeah, and we don't really know what they were like, obviously, right? Like for all we know, they were I don't know, the more ethical, spiritual tribes, right? We don't really know what the dynamic was, but that's a whole nother thread right there.
Yeah.
Listen, man, I never had you on. I got to be honest, I don't know a lot about you. So I think this is going to be a good conversation. And if you don't mind, can we kind of start from the basics? Because I really don't know much. I know you have a large following on Twitter. I think you're an OG Bitcoiner, but not to pull strings here, but I have been blocked by you for quite some time. So because of that, I've been cut off from that whole realm of the Twitter space, the kind of the Samourai Ragnar realm. So, which I think is going to make for a good interview, because we'll be talking about a lot of this will be the first for me. So, who is Ragnar? What is your crypto story?
Sure. Well, in terms of Twitter, that's just typical. You stay in Bitcoin Monero long enough, you're going to get blocked, be blocked. Sometimes you deserve it. Sometimes you don't. I've been on both sides of that equation. But, over time, I think we learned that generally people were on the same side. Generally, we want the same goals, you and I. I'm sure it's just sometimes you go about it differently, or there's a miscommunication, or just sometimes people are having a bad day. So in terms of like me, yeah, I got into Bitcoin 2011. And since then, gosh, I've done a whole bunch of different things in Bitcoin, 2 different startups. My first Bitcoin startup was 2013 was my first Bitcoin startup.
Okay.
Didn't really go anywhere, but it was an escrow service that was also kind of eBay type of thing. And the idea was to use Bitcoin escrow and then have a little marketplace. We sold a few things, but it quickly didn't go very far. We were a little too early.
What was that called?
It was called Anarch.
Oh, cool, man.
Anarch.re. Yeah, nice. Anarch.re. Yeah.
It was a peer-to-peer Bitcoin marketplace.
Yeah. Yeah, like you could list stuff. I think someone sold an old Apple computer, I think some hats, just kind of random knickknacks. And what was interesting about that is we didn't use multi-sig for the escrow. We used a split private keys, which nowadays you would never do that. But at the time, we thought we were smart. So that's how we did it. And there's a video out there somewhere of an LA Bitcoin meetup where I pitch Anarch. For 5 minutes. I'll have to search through the archives and find that. So that was, I think 2013, 2016, I had a startup for real estate, and I used Bitcoin colored coins to represent the ownership of property real estate. And did that with with Cook County in Chicago, which is the second largest county in the US. We legally transfer a piece of property on the Bitcoin blockchain. But again, we were way too early. That didn't go anywhere. And then in between, just doing different Bitcoin stuff, put on the conferences, Guns and Bitcoin, as you know, Bear Arms and Bitcoin. And this year, we're doing Finney Forum, actually 2024, Finney Forum. And we're happy to have, the podcast as a partner, at Finney Forum. So thank you very much for showing the support and looking forward to actually meeting you in person.
Thank you for inviting us as well. We're excited about that. It looks like you got a good group coming together for that.
Yeah, it's a diverse group. We've got some Monero folks like you and some others. We've got some Bitcoin people, privacy people, cybersecurity people. So it's March 15th, 16th in Dallas. Website's finneyforum.com. But we just announced today that our keynote speaker is actually Tor Eklund. So if you know Tor Eklund, he is the attorney, who's defending, Roman in the Bitcoin FOG case. So.
Yeah, I think we were one of the first to interview him. We had him on Monero Talk back in the day, and then they ended up being a speaker at Monerotopia in Mexico City, and they're doing big things, as you know. I think it's very important what they're working on. I haven't really been. I don't really know where they're currently at with that. Do you know where that's currently at?
What I do know is I think they have a court date in March, and Tor said they think they're going to be done, in time for the conference. He said there's a chance it goes longer, than he can't make it if he's in court, obviously, but I think it's March. And so I think that's where it stands. Justice moves slow, or injustice moves slow. So we'll see how that turned out. I could be wrong, but I thought that the court ruled that Chainalysis, which is a company that's working for the federal government, did the, quote unquote research, that they basically said that their algorithm couldn't be sort of examined in detail. They basically said, no, we can't allow that, which seems like a violation of the Constitution to be able to face your accuser and have the evidence against you. But supposedly, that's the last I heard. So the whole thing is just dirty. So we're really,
Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's like chain analysis is what's on trial, right?
kind of.
Yeah, it's one of the things that may come out of this. How chain analysis is then viewed in court in future cases. Actually, Arctic Mind from the Monero community, he was working on that case as well. I think he was one of their expert witnesses. So continuing though with the story. So all right, so you got it to Bitcoin early, obviously. If you're working on these startups back in 2015, 2014, approximately when did you like get into Bitcoin? And was it what was the story there? Was it one of these, I read the Satoshi white paper and I realized they solved the Byzantine generals problem and I was all in? Like what was your kind of your eureka moment with Bitcoin?
Yeah, for me, it was actually Reddit of all places. Reddit on a political philosophical forum that I came across it. And that's how I found it. And then just kind of looked into it. Got my first wallet. My first Bitcoins were actually from a faucet. Back in the day, they had these faucets where you do certain things and you get these, small amounts of Bitcoin. And I think my first purchase using Bitcoin was, 2013 from Roger Vere's store. I don't know if you remember, he had a store called Memory Dealers, and Roger Ver sold like electronics and computer cables and all sorts of stuff. So my first purchase with Bitcoin was a USB cable and a flash drive. That's what it was. And I bought that, my first purchase with Bitcoin. And that was my eureka moment, I would say. To answer your question, because I remember when I sent the Bitcoin, it was amazing. I just, you put in the address and the amount. There wasn't like credit card number and address and phone and email and all this kind of crazy stuff. And just kind of the light bulb went off like, hey, this is money that doesn't have an identity with, no intermediary. I know it's a cliche, but that's really what it was. I was sending money directly to Roger Vere's store. No one was in between us. So that was like the eureka moment for me.
Now, interesting, because that's kind of like when I first started thinking about, Monero, I guess, existed, but I didn't really know much about it. It was when I first started using Bitcoin and then going to check on the blockchain, right? To go check a block explorer to see if a transaction went through. And as I was doing that, I was thinking, wait a minute. This isn't really as anonymous as I thought it was. Did you also have that realization? Obviously, you had it at some point, but did you have that early on as well?
I think it's a process. I knew I never thought that it was completely anonymous. A lot of people did, right? With like the Silk Road, a lot of people using that thinking it was anonymous. That's how they got in trouble. Yeah. So I always knew it wasn't completely anonymous, but I didn't know like the intricate details of exactly why that was and how you can be tracked. I just knew it wasn't quite anonymous. But over time, you learn the inner details, right? There's a great book. I don't know if you've read it, by Andy Greenberg, where he talks about, all of these dark, drug markets and a couple other ones and how they were taken down. And it's interesting that yes, like Bitcoin's, lack of fungibility and things like that contributed to tracing things for sure. But how a lot of these guys got caught actually has nothing to do with Bitcoin. It was like using an email address that they used somewhere else. It was linking it to like some other social media identity. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. We tried getting him on the show because he made some interesting statements about Monero in there in that book as well. So then what was your turning point where you started to get interested in Monero? So like at what point did it become a problem for you in Bitcoin where you're like, wait a minute, it's not only pseudo anonymous, but it actually is perhaps more deeply flawed?
I don't have his exact date, but I think it was just, I remember when Monero came out and I thought it was really interesting, but I was, deep in Bitcoin and I was always very pro Bitcoin and kind of anti everything else. I don't think I ever called myself a maxi. Maybe I did, but I never just thought anything was good. And it wasn't because like it was a self-righteous religious thing. I just thought objectively everything is mostly crap. And so Monero came out. I thought it was cool, but I just didn't have the time to like want to look into it. And I thought maybe this will just go away, like Zcash. And there's been other quote unquote privacy coins, and I just thought, no, maybe this is just another one, and it's never going to get adoption. But when did I actually start using Monero and really take a deep dive? I think it was several years ago when I started to kind of get involved and understand more what gun owners face in the 3D gun printing community, what they face, their financial discrimination, despite having constitutional rights, and seeing kind of some of the problems they faced. And I think it was someone in that community that ultimately said, hey, Ragnar, like really take a look at this. And that's when I did. And so, yeah, I think the only time I haven't used Bitcoin was Monero was, I think, my first non-Bitcoin coin that I've ever used after Bitcoin, I think. And then Stacks I've used a little bit because they have some cool smart contracting stuff. But that's it. I'd never used any other coin besides that.
So it was the gun stuff that really kind of open your eyes to it. What were the details? What was going on there? It was like, explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, it's just kind of general stuff. I mean, basic things like PayPal and a lot of these type of companies simply won't allow legal, businesses to conduct business. Basic things, even selling like, parts. They're not guns. They're not anything like that. They're just parts. And so I saw that happening. And so, these people, were using Bitcoin. Again, they're not selling guns, right? They're just like parts and T-shirts and stickers and whatever it might be. So not guns. They weren't selling guns. You can't do that. But just seeing that their problem with Bitcoin, and then they said, well, I might as well use Monero if I'm going to have to go all in on crypto. So it was sort of like those guys who were really into that world. Was also in the digital world, because I don't know how much you're into like the gun culture, but there's kind of like a tiny overlap between gun owners, gun people, and like Bitcoin crypto people. It's kind of strange. You would think there'd be a big overlap, but there's not. Yeah.
You think there'd be a larger overlap, right? Is what you're saying? Yeah.
But there's not.
I mean, they're both tools for fighting tyranny. That's for sure. Yeah, so I guess that's how the Guns and Bitcoin thing then came about, right? Obviously,
sort of. So Guns and Bitcoin started out as just sort of like this attitude that I had, which is just kind of a personal philosophy where I thought, you have to protect the physical world and the digital world, and guns and Bitcoin help you with both of those. So it was more just like a Twitter account I started just to kind of share random thoughts about that, and then turned into like, let's still sell some T-shirts, and hey, let's put on a conference, because I started to meet once I started the Twitter account, I met some other people who kind of thought like I did. And in the middle of COVID 2020, we launched our first conference, which was interesting. We were going to have it in Portland, and COVID, they wouldn't allow us to do it, so we had to move it to Texas. And then that's how it got started, middle of COVID.
Awesome. Yeah, and then you had it in Miami, right?
Yep.
You had your, I guess that was the second one in Miami. So is Guns and Bitcoin, is that done, or are you still doing, or has it turned into Finney Forum?
It's kind of on the back burner. I guess you could say it's turned into Finney Forum in the sense that I wanted to focus more on Monero and cybersecurity. And I thought to do that, I should just kind of launch a new conference that is more consistent with that and just focus on cryptocurrency and cybersecurity as well. I wanted to add that. And actually, even we're going to have 1 or 2 Ordinal speakers, which sounds incongruent. Okay. It doesn't sound like it would fit, but actually Ordinals really offers you a way to exercise free speech and publish things that are uncensorable. So to me, it's not about like the monkey JPEGs and the ugly art. I think most of that is superfluous. Yeah. I don't like almost any of it, but there's some really cool things you can do with Ordinals in terms of publishing, PDFs, but even audio, video. You could actually publish websites, believe it or not. You could publish websites as Ordinal inscriptions.
Yeah. That totally makes sense to me, right? That's essentially it's free speech, right? We say it's free speech money, right? Money is speech, but then this is just another obviously form of it, using this protocol to essentially say things out there without being censored, and in a way where it can never be erased. It will last forever, in theory. So I'm right there with you. So give us some deeper insight into that then, in terms of what your overall kind of viewpoint of what Bitcoin is, or what you see as the true value proposition to crypto, or do you see it as having multiple value propositions? Obviously, you're interested in the digital cash use case, like we're talking about. People should be able to have a tool where if they want to buy gun parts, they could do it without surveillance or censorship. But now you're talking about just this concept of being able to publish things freely. So what do you see as the value proposition or propositions of cryptocurrency?
Well, I think I see it in terms of like three areas. I think of Bitcoin, I think of Monero, and then I think of like stacks. And I think they all kind of have their niche. So starting with Bitcoin, I see that primarily as a publishing space, as sort of a, publishing ordinals or even transactions. And obviously as money, but I don't think that's what Bitcoin does best. I think what it does best is store data. That's what I think.
I kind of think of it as like property, right? Like digital property. Yeah. Is that you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like digital property. And one of the earliest, I think, ideas people came up with is Bitcoin is like real estate. That block space is so valuable because of what you could put in there. So because of the security and everything else, I think Bitcoin's biggest strength is that block space, this uncensorable block space. I don't think it's the best peer-to-peer money. Obviously, I use it as that, but I don't think that's what it's best at. And that's where Monero comes in, which I think is the best peer-to-peer digital money. And then Stacks is good for smart contracts and some scaling stuff for Bitcoin smart contracts. So it's like, I guess to sum it up, it's three things. I'd say it's like free speech, private money, and then kind of, decentralized smart contracts and quote unquote DeFi. Okay.
Yeah, I'd say I'm pretty much right there with you. Obviously, I think the digital cash use case is the most compelling. Or maybe the one that I think will provides the most utility. The digital property for Bitcoin, you use the word censorship, resistant to censorship, but is it resistant to censorship? I think maybe what Bitcoin does, right? If we're treating it like digital property, maybe really what it offers is this ability to always prove that you have title, right? And really kind of in a very public way. And it's stored on this blockchain for all to see. Like, this is my property. Now we're trying to obfuscate it because we want to use this blockchain for making digital cash transactions, but it seems like its nature is more transparent. And if that is the case, does that work against its ability to be censorship resistant? Do you think it is censorship resistant, a censorship resistant network?
I think it's not binary, right? I think it's all on a scale of what's censorship resistant, and Monero obviously falls on that spectrum as well. But to answer your question, I think it is pretty censorship resistant. I think it's the fungibility and privacy is hard, but not impossible. Today we had that Twitter space. I saw you were on there, which thanks for joining that.
Yes.
So using like Whirlpool with Samourai and then also like Sparrow wallet, that obviously really helps to get a lot better privacy for Bitcoin. So you definitely can get privacy on Bitcoin. It's just harder. It's extra steps. It costs more because you got to do certain things. And there's other issues, but yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is the most, has the most liquidity, the most users, the most, merchants accepted. And so there's no reason to say I'm against Bitcoin. Like, you just have to take extra steps. And so for me, Bitcoin and Monero go together, peanut butter and jelly, right?
Yeah. I'm not saying, I'm just trying to figure out, like actual use cases, and if Bitcoin is, if it is built to be truly censorship resistant, right? We're seeing kinks in the armor right now, right? We saw, now that you have right, Ocean is censoring Samourai Whirlpool transactions. That obviously their intent is to censor these BRC20 tokens, or right, these basically they want to censor the NFTs on Bitcoin. but they're also censoring other types of transactions. One of them being Samourai Whirlpool transactions, which are there to add fungibility and privacy. But just the fact that they can do that, is that showing that Bitcoin is failing as a censorship resistant network? And then there's other examples too. We saw miners that have attempted to be OFAC compliant. We saw that recently. We saw that happen again. And now we have, I think, over 50% of all mining pools are KYC'd miners. Do you see kinks in the armor there in regards to Bitcoin's censorship resistant?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's objectively has issues with the mining, right? I mean, you have to have a lot of money and a lot of technical knowledge to really mine Bitcoin. You could do it, home mining still works, but realistically, it's kind of dominated by kind of people with a lot more capital and full-time expertise. And like you said, the big miners, they're often publicly traded companies. They're required to do KYC, AML. They're required to do all that. And so
crazy.
It's just the reality. Now, people can point their hash power elsewhere if they don't like the pool they're in. And so far, when they're having attempts to censor, like there was, like I think a year ago at that OFAC pool, they didn't get very far. They stopped doing that. Ocean, I think they're
yeah, but now there was another recent OFAC. What was the pool that recently did? I think it was like
F2 pool, I think, is who did that. So it's always lurking there, right? It's like there's always that possibility that these miners can censor.
That seems to be the trend. I don't know if do you know Uri Bednar? Are you familiar with him, Uri?
Sounds familiar, but
like Parnelli Polis. He's one of. Yeah. He wrote. I mean, it's been years ago now, but he kind of laid it all out there. The trajectory of what censorship resistance might look like in Bitcoin, given the fact that miners can be co-opted by governments through regulation and basically be forced to start doing what they say in terms of how the transactions that they're allowed to verify. Do you think these little things we're seeing are just the beginning of what will ultimately be the end, and that Bitcoin can effectively be co-opted by governments, and miners can be forced to be OFAC compliant? Or do you think it's just something that we're seeing bits and pieces of, but they're never going to be able to get a grapple over Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a good question. I if I had to predict and put money on it, I don't think that the state is really going to be able to really prevent Bitcoin through miners. I think they're going to keep adding more pressure, and I think you will see more of the larger mining companies start to comply with things actually kind of don't need to, maybe, or ultimately, with Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, she's just like doing everything she can to kill Bitcoin, everything, crypto, everything. So do I think they're going to keep going after it? Yes. I don't think the mining will ultimately stop Bitcoin, just simply because people could point their hashing elsewhere. It's not hard to, like in China, right? Like China kind of outlawed Bitcoin, and the miners went to the US, and the miners could go other places. But it is a reality that they can kind of make a dent in it. But I think they have other means to do that.
But in a scenario where 95% of all miners are part of one of these large companies that are essentially in bed with the regulators, where do you go to get your transaction validated if all the mining is effectively being done by these large corporations that are now doing OFAC compliant mining, and they don't mind doing it because they benefit from working with the regulators, right? And keeping outside and having essentially an advantage over other miners that aren't in bed with the regulators. How does that scenario not come to pass?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, like you said, they've done that, but then they stopped. I think it was, a year or two ago now. Michael Saylor, he was associated with one of these, and they did it for, I think, maybe a couple weeks. I mean, but they stopped, and F2 Pool did it once. So I just think based on what they've done so far, it hasn't been an issue. Doesn't mean it won't be, but it's something to kind of keep an eye on. Again, people could point their hash power elsewhere. It could, it could move, but it's something to keep an eye on. Absolutely. It's an attack vector. It's to me not their best way of going after Bitcoin or any crypto, but they're going to look into that. Look, if they're trying to say that a non-custodial wallet is illegal,
right?
It doesn't matter who you are, Monero, Bitcoin, like you can't even like hold your own crypto. That's what I think Elizabeth Warren's bill is trying to do, I think, or something like that. That's crazy.
Yeah. She is totally dead set against privacy coins and like that whole concept. Like she sees that as like literally, the devil, right? Which is ironic considering she is the devil. She does not make any sense, right? If you go back and look at how she started as a political figure and what she was supposed to stand for, and here she is fighting against liberty, freedom tech, right? That's built to disrupt the fiat system and built to disrupt the banking system, and it's built to create a beautiful permissionless system that anybody can use. And she's managed to politically somehow be on the other side, on the wrong side of that one, like in such a passionate way too. Do you think she's ultimately like, controlled by the bankers or something? Is it just
she has that incentive to do what she does, and why do politicians do what they do? It's either money or power, usually both. So I guess for her, that's her way. It's kind of surprising that, she lied about her ethnicity. She said she was Native American. And so you would think she would be canceled. That's a pretty shameful thing to do, lie about your ethnicity. But I guess if you make the right people happy, then you can get away with everything. But it's interesting you brought up about like privacy coins, how she doesn't like those. And so it's interesting what happens if they try to completely ban using any privacy coin, Monero, Zcash.
Yes.
Like,
I was going to ask you that.
Will that be? And what's interesting, how does that compare to Bitcoin? Because let's think of a scenario where they say, okay, we're fine with Bitcoin. We won't like make it illegal, just the usual KYC stuff. Yeah. But what if they say Monero, any privacy coin is, if you use it, like it's offense, you get 6 months in prison. Like, I wonder if they're going to try to do that. And then at that point, do you say, well, which is more censorship resistant? Monero at the protocol level, but then functionally, is it? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. It's all interesting game. What's interesting about that too is it's definitely going to create a Streisand effect, right? Mm-hmm. We were talking about the Monero-topia the other day, and I totally agree with that theory. I think it's going to end up being what takes Monero to the next level, right? In terms of user adoption and really just name recognition, right? At the end of the day, all these things are really memes, right? The more people that know what Bitcoin is, the more value it has, right? It's like the US dollar itself. So I think if we see the government actually target Monero specifically, and it becomes something that Senator Warren starts saying by name, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to get a lot of people that are on the fringe of Bitcoin privacy move into Bitcoin privacy, or realize even more so the importance of privacy in crypto. I think, right? I think that camp might grow in response to it. We're already in that camp, right? But you have a lot of these like BTC maxis and all these people, and just crypto users in general, who haven't really stopped to think about these things. And if they see that Senator Warren is trying to ban a particular protocol, I think it might get them to question and start to go down that rabbit hole. Do you think it could have that potential effect?
Yeah, I think it could have that effect, right? Streisand effect is a perfect example of that. Yeah, absolutely. People say, oh, wow, what's this Monero? I heard about it, but now they're banning it by name specifically. What's interesting is how much actually the state hasn't gone after Monero or even Zcash. It's kind of interesting, I think, because when you hear them talk, it's always about Bitcoin mixers, but then also Ethereum, right? Like Whirl, Tornado Cash. So they talk a lot about that, but you would think they would really go after Monero. And I think there's a reason why they don't talk about it. And now some people might say, well, it's pretty small, the percentage. Like illicit uses, as they call it, right? Like North Korea, darknet markets, like most of them do use Bitcoin because of the liquidity. And so maybe it's just, well, not enough crime, quote unquote, crime is being used, with Monero, and maybe that's why. But it could be what you said, which is they kind of don't want to bring that up.
Yeah, it's going to end up hurting them more than helping them. There's really no way for them to go after it out in the open where they don't end up empowering it more. I don't see how they can do it. And it's also it's going to be a Supreme Court case at that point, right? There's no way you ban Monero, you ban an open source protocol. You don't allow people to use an open source system to transfer digits over the internet without having some Supreme Court case over it. And at that point, it becomes, well, how do you justify allowing citizens of the U.S. to use Bitcoin, but to not use Monero? What is the difference between the two protocols at that point? What is the difference between the two technologies?
Well, I think how they're going after it is just saying any sort of, I think maybe I should have read Elizabeth Warren's bill before this, but I think they're actually going after kind of any open source protocol, anything that can in any way enable people to have privacy. I mean, they're not like trying to be subtle about it. And so Monero just falls into that, Bitcoin, everything else. And so I agree with you. It could go to the Supreme Court. It could be 10 years before they find the right case, and who knows who's going to be on the bench by then. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, how can they do this? Well, they're doing it. And today on Twitter, I saw this video. It was from a conference. I think it was a conference basically with law enforcement talking about the sanctions, right? Mm-hmm. And there was someone from the FBI, OFAC, and I think the Treasury, and they were talking about these Bitcoin mixers. And they did not want to talk about Tornado Cash at all. It was like a really sore spot. And someone said, someone's like, don't put me on the spot for that one. So I think they've gotten so much pushback from trying to ban Tornado Cash that they know that there's a line there. And it's just strange because usually they're so like confident they can, that they're the state, they have a lot of power. It was interesting that they didn't really want to go into that.
Do you love coffee and Monero as much as we do? Consider making gratuitous.org your daily cup. Pay with Monero for premium fresh beans, and if you like what you taste, send a digital cash tip directly to the farmers that made it possible. Use Monero to buy gifts this year. Everyone has coffee drinkers on their list. For a limited time only, get 10% off of 3, 6, and 12-month gratuitous.org coffee subscriptions. Proceeds help us grow this channel, Gratuitous, and Monero.
So what do you think, man? You think it's likely to happen? You think we'll see some kind of privacy coin ban?
I think it's not. I think a privacy coin ban would just be part of a larger bill that just says any sort of open source software, and that will include coins, it'll include mixers, it'll include anything you could think of, unhosted wallets, self-hosted wallets. I mean, they're gonna name it all.
As a ban, you think that could be really?
Yeah, wow. I think Elizabeth Warren's already trying to do that.
But then including Bitcoin? No,
I think they won't ban Bitcoin, but what they'll say is, any sort of their wallets, you can't have your own wallet. They're already saying that if you send, or they're trying to say that if you send someone Bitcoin, you have to basically KYC them, basically.
Right. They're saying it needs to be treated like the same as the banking. Like it's unfair to the bankers because they have to follow these regulations. So why doesn't the Bitcoin network have to follow it? Is basically what the argument that they're making, which is absurd, crazy.
Yeah, but that crazy doesn't matter, right? Logic doesn't matter, like justice, constitution, none of that matters. So it's just a matter of how do we still continue to try to do what we can and exercise our rights despite them being trampled. So, it's going to be interesting. I think Monero hasn't truly been tested yet. I think Bitcoin is being tested, but I don't think Monero's quite been like enemy number one. Maybe behind the scenes it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, but
well, Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin's never really been. It's always had the green light, right? It was never There's never been an attempt by the government to shut down Bitcoin, as far as we know, unless there was something done behind the scenes. But there was never.
China did, right? China basically banned Bitcoin.
Right, and it just moved to the U.S. Right, and it moved to the U.S. Right, so I like to think, or I don't know. Do you think Monero is potentially more unstoppable than Bitcoin, right? Because that's what we're getting at, right? So we're saying, all right, there's potential that the government's going to try to stop this thing, and that's what the whole, cypherpunk ideology, crypto anarchist ideology is, right? It's like, well, fuck them. We don't care what they're going to try to do. We're trying to build something that they can't stop anyway. Do you think Monero is potentially more unstoppable than Bitcoin because of its privacy, its fungibility, its mining network that isn't ASIC based, and all these other things we're talking about?
That's a great question. So,
what do you think Monero? Bitcoin has the advantage because of its transparency, and because of that, it's almost embraced by governments to the point where they'll never try to. Like, that's its strong point. Is that it's unstoppable because governments aren't going to stop it. They're not going to try to stop it.
Yeah. So to your point, I think a really good thought experiment has been if Satoshi had, released Monero instead of Bitcoin, or maybe Monero and Bitcoin at the same time as a thought experiment. Like, what would have been the trajectory? And let's say it was Monero instead of Bitcoin that Satoshi created, like back in 2009. Well, would the state have just crushed back then when it was small and it could, because it truly was, anonymous and private and fungible? Would they have done that? And when Bitcoin came out, were they kind of like, well, it's really not anonymous, so it's not a priority. We can still track people down. So they weren't as worried. So that's sort of like the broad thought experiment. And a lot of people have said, well, Bitcoin is less likely to be censored because it's just transparent enough to where people feel comfortable, the state feels comfortable being able to track it when they need to. So they'll kind of allow that. Now, that is kind of held up until recently now with mixers and Tornado Cash, these other Bitcoin mixers. So we're starting to see that tested. We're starting to see if they're going to say, okay, before you are getting your Bitcoin privacy through different CoinJoin implementations. So far, they haven't ruled against it. Like, it's perfectly legal to use Whirlpool and, other things like that. Totally not a problem. But you can see why they would kind of are looking at that now. So we'll see. So that's Bitcoin. In terms of Monero, again, I think it's strange they haven't really come out and put on red alert about Bitcoin. So that either means that they don't see it as a threat, maybe because liquidity, so few crimes are actually with Monero, or they kind of purposely aren't. And they're kind of building things behind the scenes. Most of the cybercrime, again, is Bitcoin, and then all the hacks are smart contracts because Ethereum is riddled with holes, right? And so most of the crime has been that. So maybe if you see something egregious with Monero, some terrible terrorism incident, or something awful like that, or North Korea, maybe then that's when you're going to see it hit. But it's kind of strange. And when you read certain reports and certain articles and PDFs on, it is interesting that Monero really isn't brought up.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I have seen it though in RAND reports and stuff. Obviously it does get mentioned. I mean, they have their eye on it for sure. It's right. I mean, we had the IRS put out a bounty to try to demystify Monero, and the Lightning Network as well.
Oh yeah.
So much to talk about. I realized as I'm saying, oh my God, we got so many things to talk about. Yeah, I mean, I just want to pull on this thread a little more though. So I see I see Bitcoin, a high probability that Bitcoin essentially gets defanged, right? Like I said, I think we're seeing hints of it now, but I think ultimately it becomes this defanged beast that is globally adopted. It almost becomes fiatized, right? Just like gold, right? It's like people aren't even buying gold anymore; they're buying paper gold, right? Bitcoin almost becomes fiatized in that it exists. It's this network. You can use it to hold property on and transfer it, but it's all completely, it becomes effectively completely transparent and in lockstep with the government and the regulators in a way that ultimately perhaps even benefits them, right? It becomes this perfectly taxable, ledger, right? Global ledger that governments can peer into. They know how much of this digital property you have. They can see you when you're moving it. Do you see that? Are you as extreme as me in that thinking, or you have more hope for Bitcoin?
I think I probably have a little more hope for Bitcoin. Simply looking at what they're doing, I don't think they'll ever completely, like ban everything. Although it seems like some people are trying to do that. What I'm looking at actually is I'm really curious what happens when someone publishes something as an ordinal. Maybe it's a website that can't be taken down, right? Because the code is there. That's what I'm keeping my eye out for, because eventually, a really bad actor is going to put something really awful out there that I think everyone disagrees with. Hey, this is not, like, we're privacy advocates, but this is not okay. And when that starts coming out, that's when I think things will get interesting, because now that's not an issue of like KYC, right? That's not an issue of sending funds to, we're gonna ban this address because it's a sanctioned person or entity. Now it's just like a one-time thing. Like, you can't, like, once you create that inscription, like, that's it. You're not trying to send it around usually for that type of thing. And so now that isn't with mixers. That's not with KYC. That's like more like a protocol level thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I think it could get really interesting, which I think is sort of inevitable. That's when we'll see. That to me will be the ultimate test if they're going to go after truly the protocol.
Yeah, people are going to do that just for the hell of it, even if they're not have intent behind it, just to test the network, right, and see what reaction they will get out of governments. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the reason why it hasn't, I mean, obviously people have made ordinals of all sorts of, pornographic stuff and other things. And I think generally why it hasn't been an issue is because, all the main block explorers and the wallets, they filter that stuff out. And so, because most people don't want to see any of that. And so that's why maybe it hasn't been an issue, because all the wallet, they just filter that out. It's not like there's some big service that's publishing those things that people do. But eventually, I think there'll be something that can't be denied that will have a Streisand effect. Will be something pretty big, and everyone's going to look into it, find it. And then that's when that's to me, to answer your question, is what I'm really looking at in terms of like existential for Bitcoin. And I could be wrong, but that's what I'm keeping my eye on.
And then, so what happens out of that? What's the result of that existential moment? So you're saying then at that point, there's potentially a protocol change or something big that then takes away Bitcoin's censorship resistance? Or
yeah, I think if hypothetically there's, had to guess, it would probably be functional code that can't be taken down, that's doing something, displaying something. So my guess is it's not like one PDF or something. My guess is it'd have to be some sort of functional code website, something. And if they're motivated enough, if it's awful enough, my guess is then it will come down to mining, right? Because like banning wallets doesn't do anything, like KYC doesn't do anything, mixers doesn't do anything. So maybe that is when they'll try to control the mining, and maybe they will come after every miner and say, hey, you need to keep an eye out, for these types of ordinal inscriptions. And you can't mine anything that includes this sort of thing, even though, hey, once it's there, it's there. You can't double spend. You really can't double spend once or twice. Yeah, but so that's what I think.
And then, so is that then my doomsday scenario at that point? Isn't it a co-opted network at that point?
Well, that's the question. I mean, this was an early question, right? Like Andreas Antonopoulos used to talk about this back in like 2011 or 12, and people would ask him, what happens if, the government runs the miners? What happens if they buy all the miners? What happens if they go after the major, mining pools? And he said, well, they might be able to control the network, but people will just fork it, and it'll be a new fork, and it'll be ones that people believe who aren't going to be compliant with this stuff. And maybe it's the major chain or maybe it's the minor chain. But I think if it truly comes to that point where truly the state is really controlling enough hash power, either directly or indirectly, they truly are controlling the network 51% or 70%. You can fork the network and say, well, this is our Bitcoin now. We're calling it Bitcoin Freedom or something. Mm-hmm. And it'll be a hard fork. And then maybe that's kind of what Andreas said, 10 years ago. That would be the scenario I would see.
What is the current temperament in Bitcoin? I think you have your finger on the pulse of that better than I do right now. I mean, I on Twitter I see, I think I see issues with the ocean miner censoring Samourai that got a lot of play, and people talking about the ordinals and the factions that want to censor that versus the ones that want to allow it. Are we potentially entering kind of another Bitcoin civil war era here, like we saw with the block size?
I don't think we are. I mean, that's a good parallel as the block size wars, but I don't think we are. And actually, I'm very optimistic about Bitcoin. I mean, this has kind of been the best time to be in Bitcoin since, the very early days. And the reason why I say that is now there are more wallets that are going to be doing Whirlpool. So obviously Samourai wallet is the original implementer of it, but then you have Sparrow, and on the Twitter space today, they talked about a couple other wallets that were going to do it. So that's good. We're seeing more of the Whirlpool CoinJoin implementations. I think the Maxis, the Laseride, the Priests are being slowly discarded. I think they're Bitcoin only church cult that they were in. I think has seen its best days, and I think those people are kind of giving up on that, or they're no longer the dominant voice. And I think that whole concept, those guys are going away. I think Ordinals is bringing in a whole new group of people, new money, new developers, new use cases, not just like dumb art, but actually some really cool things you can do. So I think Bitcoin is actually in a really good place in terms of protocol and the people, because Bitcoin has been stagnant for so many years. And even from the beginning, like the core devs, a lot of them to core have really focused not on privacy at all. It's always been about scripting and time locks and more of a financial instrument. They really shot themselves in the foot. We can't come back to that. But in terms of Bitcoin, I think to answer your question, it's a change of the guard. That's what I would say. It's a change of the guard. I think it's a new era with more people in it now. That being said, the state is coming down harder in general, but Bitcoin itself has some of the best people now.
Yeah. That's okay. That's so you're okay with ordinals on Bitcoin. Were you okay with mordinals on Monero? What was your take on that?
I wasn't deep into it enough to care. I know that there was a hot minute it was there. What was sort of, what was the case there that happened with Ordinals?
I mean, people were using Monero to publish ordinals, but then basically some changes were made. Right, there's the TX extra field of Monero is what allowed this to happen, and there's always been this idea of deprecating that at some point. So that hasn't been deprecated yet, but without getting to the technicalities, basically it's not as easy to use it for those purposes anymore. But overall, what was thinking there with that? Was it like, well, it is what it is. If people want to do more ordinals on Monero, let them do ordinals on Monero, or did you view it a little differently because of the fact that it potentially affected fungibility?
Yeah, that's a good question. To me, it was sort of like, I don't want to stop people from doing things, right? But there was definitely a part of me that was like, why don't we just leave ordinals out of Monero? Let's just not. I don't want to stop someone from doing it, but personally, my opinion was, I hope this doesn't really take off. Like, let's use Bitcoin, let's use stacks, let's use other things, and just the way the Monero community is, I never thought it would get far, simply because it's not the culture. And if you're like an artist, you want to go where the liquidity is, and you're not going to be publishing a lot of art on Monero. There's just not enough users for it to be worth your while. And so that's sort of my take. But it's interesting, like hard forks, in terms of like censorship resistance, it's interesting how so far hard forks seem to have worked well for Monero. But that's something to keep an eye on, I think, is maybe my concern there is, could there be a hard fork that isn't a good thing? So far, it seems like it's worked pretty well. Like Bitcoin has struggled in a sense because of its soft forks, and there's good reasons for soft forks, but
yeah, I think it's because Monero has a very cohesive value proposition, right? The community, by and far, for the most part, all agrees what the purpose of this tool is, which is digital cash transactions. Whereas in Bitcoin, not everybody's thinking along those lines, right? Even you and I are saying, well, it's not even digital cash, it's property. So I think that's fundamentally the difference between the two in terms of why perhaps Monero is able to kind of do these forks with no issue. Do you agree with that, or do you see things a little differently?
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right that it's sort of the culture of Monero. And I think if you don't like that, you have other options, right? Like if you think store value, you just go to Bitcoin. If you want to publish ordinals because you're an artist, you go to Bitcoin. So it's sort of like self-selecting out. Like those kind of people simply just don't get into Monero because it's not a good place for it. And so they naturally don't go there. Which has been nice. I think it's complementary, like at Finney Forum, that's why we're talking about both. And we're going to talk about like the pros and cons and where things break down between the two, because they do go well together. But yeah, so far it's been cohesive, which is strange because when you come from Bitcoin world, right, it's like so much just stupid drama and so many factions and so much like LARPing, and not just that, but like soap opera stuff. And you would think that'd be the case in Monero. Like I would think Monero would be like the most difficult, caustic, negative, hostile, rancorous coin. But it's kind of not. It's kind of surprising because so much is on the line and it's privacy. So you would think, I don't know, maybe I'm just way off, but I'm kind of surprised how it's actually kind of cohesive and relatively pleasant. Kind of surprising.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. We have our moments.
Yeah, we blocked each other, so we know that things happen. But overall, like compared to
out of guns in Bitcoin, Ragnar, you kicked me out.
Yeah. But compared to Bitcoin with the drama there, so it's kind of surprising, and like not to be like conspiratorial, but the state always infiltrates any group that they disagree with, and that's always like, okay, who in Monero, right? Because there's the state is in Monero, but they're there, I'm sure, obviously. But so far, it doesn't seem like they've made a dent. Doesn't mean they can't in the future, but so far, like, it doesn't seem like there's any powerful state actors that are really like rankling things up and really trying to pull the reins in a certain direction, as far as I know.
Right, unless it's so nefarious and diabolical that it's happening on some level we're not aware of yet. Hey, which is possible. But so what do you then see Bitcoin as designing towards? So like we're saying, right, there's that cohesion there in Monero on what the value proposition is. All design decisions are towards that end of censorship resistant, untraceable, unstoppable digital cash. What motivates the design decisions in Bitcoin? And is there even a shared belief on what motivates the design decisions in Bitcoin?
I think Bitcoin is obviously there's more variety in terms of how people see it. I'll say that I think the Lightning Network now is a lot of people realizing it just doesn't deliver what it was promised to deliver in terms of payments. I think we're in a permanent high fee environment now with Bitcoin. So fees are just going to be high, probably permanently, which really can hinder the peer-to-peer cash because it's more expensive to do. So I think that digital cash is going to suffer a little bit just because of the fees. Or I think are going to be high, and Lightning actually isn't a solution to that. I think people love NFTs. They love art. They love ordinals. So I think that's really going to go far in the long term. Like Taproot Wizards raised millions of dollars. They're like the biggest ordinal collection in terms of money raised, I think. So in terms of Bitcoin, what's its sort of message? I think it's going to be a combination of like, ordinals, art, and think also as like an asset. There's going to be ETFs will be approved. Just a matter of time. I know people have been saying ETFs for 10 years, but there will be approved ETFs. And when that hits, Bitcoin is going to be digital gold. Maybe it'll be even neutered and censored, like you alluded to. But so kind of those kind of two or three things I would say. Definitely more art, definitely more DeFi with layers, different layers. You can be able to DeFi type things, smart contract type things. But so yeah, that peer-to-peer cash I think is going to be, it'll always be there. There's so much liquidity, but it's you're not going to think Bitcoin and payments.
Right.
Like that's not what people are going to like. First thing comes to their mind.
Yeah. And do you see the number go up thing as helping to propel the movement away from cash utility, right? Feeding into that? Because I do. I feel like that's the number go up. It's great. It's a great way to bootstrap, right? It was a genius thing that Satoshi came upon here, that the system would bootstrap itself by becoming more valuable over time and with every new user. But it also seems to be its Achilles heel in terms of now designing towards number go up instead of designing towards censorship resistant, digital cash network.
Yeah. The number go up thing, you can make the argument has actually hindered Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer payment system because people don't want to spend it. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing we've heard for so many years is why would you spend your Bitcoin? Why would you possibly do that? Because people just want to make money. And that's really, it's kind of hindered Bitcoin. And I think, yes, that will probably continue to further hinder Bitcoin in terms of like wanting it to be a payment system, simply because when the ETFs are approved, I think that's really going to increase the price. And once those big institutions are on board, like Bitcoin has a new floor in terms of the low price that it will hit because of those major institutions. And at that point, all the money, the headlines, the talent is going to be more on that asset management side. And it's going to be sort of more of the paradigm for Bitcoin. Bitcoin, anyone can do anything with it, but you will, I think, see even more of a transition emphasis on the number go up once that happens. And including ordinals, like the cost of the value of ordinals, number go up on those as well. The speculation, just like we saw in Ethereum with all the NFTs, it's going to be a casino. That's what I see.
What do you think of the meme of hold Bitcoin but spend Monero?
Yeah, I get it. It's not something I would propagate because I really think that Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer payment system. And I think because so many more companies and individuals accept that as a payment method, that we need to grow that Bitcoin economy. And so I get that, but I just kind of don't like it because I think Bitcoin should be used for payments. And I think we should encourage that. But if people say, well, I think Bitcoin's price will go up more than Monero, so I'm just going to kind of use that as my investment and spend Monero, that's fine, I guess, as long as people are using Monero. But, I don't like that dialectic. I don't like that splitting it into the,
Yeah, and it also takes away, from Monero's value proposition as being a scarce digital asset as well, right? It's like, why can Bitcoin be digital gold but Monero can't? They're like, anybody who understands the economics of these things, there's absolutely no reason why Monero can't be as digital gold like, if not more, because of its fungibility. And it's arguably, it's more predictable supply. I make that argument as well, right? We don't know. One day, the 21 million may have to be a tail emission may have to be added to Bitcoin at some point to continue to maintain the network. Where do you fall on that? I mean, we've even heard Bitcoiners talk, like Peter Todd has even talked about perhaps the potential need to add a tail emission to Bitcoin. Yeah, what do you think about all those things that just threw at you there?
Yeah, no, I really think a tail emission makes sense for Bitcoin. I think it should have it. I think that was something. I understand why Satoshi didn't do that, but I think it was a mistake looking back. And I think a tail emission is important, and why Monero does it. And in terms of like digital gold, and Monero absolutely can be digital gold, like it is, right? Bitcoiners will say, well, it has infinite supply, right? Because it never stops being produced. There's always that tail emission, but that's stupid. It's tiny. But yeah, and the other thing about people who want to say, oh, only use Monero to spend. It's like, no, let's say you're sort of a paranoid person and you think, okay, we're going to have more control, more surveillance, more of a crackdown. Well, don't you want to be hoarding Monero? I mean,
right.
You want to hoard Monero. Like you want to spend it, but you really want to hoard Monero, I right. think.
Right. It's like only use a gun if you need it, but you need to have to use it.
Yeah, that's what I was. That's actually how I think about it. It's funny you say that, because I was thinking in my mind, it's like a gun and it's like ammo.
Yeah.
Like if you truly think you need it, you want more ammo and you want more guns, because you don't want to say, oh, only like use bullets that are inexpensive and only shoot those. It's like, no, you got to practice with it, but to get good at it. Like you don't want to be too late on it. So that's why I don't like the dichotomy of like spend this, but save that. It's like you want to do both, be good at both, have as much as both as possible.
All right. Yeah, I like that. What's the deal? Give me some insight into Samourai, because I haven't spoken to those guys in a while as well. Why aren't they all in on Monero? Like that's the kind of a gripe I've had with them. I don't understand, because they understand this better than anybody, right? They understand the need for censorship resistant digital cash. That's why they're working tirelessly on trying to create things that allow you to use Bitcoin in that way. Unfortunately, it's not easy to do in Bitcoin, but here you have, on the other hand, you have something Monero that works beautifully for that purpose. I respect the fact that they're building all these things, but why don't they like accept Monero or maybe they do? Is there a plan to accept Monero natively on their app? I've heard them talk about in terms of atomic swaps and the same idea of, ultimately Monero is worthless against Bitcoin, but you can use it if you want to wash essentially as a mixer, right? You could essentially use it as a mixer for Bitcoin, but they never take the next step of saying on its own, it's a good technology and it works as digital cash. And we're promoting it, we're using it, we're building things for that. Just give me the insights there on Samourai.
Yeah, well, obviously I can't speak for Samourai. They're a team, but what I can say is they do like Monero a lot. They fully appreciate it. They like it. They're friendly to it. I thought they were working on the swaps. I don't know what the status of that is.
Yeah.
So they've come out and said that. I can't speak for them, but I think they just have so much on their plate, right? Like they're so busy with Whirlpool. And I just saw the other day, like I think reached like an all-time high again of Whirlpool. So I think they're just so busy with what they are doing that they just like, well, I don't even know. Maybe they want to, but they don't have the bandwidth. I don't know, but I know they're just so busy as it is. And
yeah, if that's the case, then yeah, I can't fault them for that. If it's just a bandwidth issue and it's like we would do it, but we don't have the time, or is it more of like a philosophical where Bitcoiners?
No, not that way. Yeah, okay. They're like privacy first, and then they're definitely like me in terms of like it's just a tool, right? Like Bitcoin, Monero are just tools. They're not like the point of it. They're just a tool, and they were privacy guys before Bitcoin, and they'll be after it goes away if it ever does. So no, they like Monero. I think they're just have their hands full with Bitcoin. And I think it's good because it's kind of amazing in a bad way just how little emphasis privacy has had in Bitcoin. You think of all the talent, all the money, all the VCs, all the podcasts, all the conferences, all the stuff. And like Samourai has kind of been really the only ones who have had like usable, practical privacy things. Like, it's kind of amazing for how much money is in Bitcoin. They're kind of the only ones. Like, there's some other stuff, but it's like not good. It's just it blows my mind, and I can't wrap my head around why there's not more competitors to Samourai, or why people just haven't. So maybe that's also, they're in a good position in that sense.
Right. They're the specialist for that purpose. Very true. Very true. Yeah, I think the atomic swaps that they're adding is really for purposes of getting rid of the toxic change. I think is like how they're currently thinking about it. So like, yeah, yet again, I'm like, so why not just like add atomic swaps to Samourai, and you could hold your Bitcoin there, you could hold your Monero there. That will they be at Finney Fest? Because if they are, then I'll be able to ask him that question, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a couple of guys from Samourai that'll be at Finney Forum. Ergo's a speaker.
Finney Forum, I'm sorry. Turn it to Finney. That's the after party.
That's the after party. Yeah, no, I like that. That's a good one. But Ergo will be there. He's on their OXT Block Explorer software that they have. He'll be a speaker. BTC Zelk will be a speaker, although he doesn't work for Samourai. Well, they have the node, Ronin Dojo node, which does Whirlpool and is a Bitcoin node. So he'll be there. And maybe some of the actual Samourai guys will be there as well. We're still trying to figure out their schedule and stuff like that. So definitely there'll be guys for you to speak with from the Samourai world, definitely there. So definitely, raise some eyebrows and start a conversation.
I won't be that annoying. I promise. Yeah. I'm so inquisitive when it comes to understand, like some people, I try to understand their true motivations in crypto. Like Andreas Antonopoulos, you brought up, right? Like I never understood why that guy never spoke about Monero more, right? Like he seemed to, that's what, he's what brought me into Bitcoin, right? He's really what gave me the initial deep understanding of the value prop of what crypto is supposed to be. And yet you never really hear him talking about Monero and all the good things it's doing towards that end of being digital cash, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, where is he? I haven't heard from Andreas in years.
That's true. I generally haven't heard much from him lately.
Maybe he's just retired. Yeah. I mean, he certainly has enough.
Well, actually, remember, right? At some point, he revealed that he didn't have any Bitcoin, and then people donated to him. That was incredible.
Yeah, well, there was that one thing with I think it was a Roger Ver thing. It was something where like he got this big donation or won a bet or something. But I thought there was something with Roger Ver, and then Andreas like kept it, and it was like a big payday. But I know behind the scenes, Andreas has been like an advisor to lots of companies behind the scenes. So, maybe stuff there, but yeah, it's kind of disappointing. He was very inspirational, although he started to, I think, upset some people because he's on the left side of politics. And I would say probably more people in Bitcoin are on the right side. There's people on both sides, but I think some of his leftist views people didn't like. So maybe that, or maybe he's retired, I don't know, but fortunately, the world has grown since Andreas and those small groups. So there's plenty of good people now.
In general, though, like people of that nature, right, that are in Bitcoin for its censorship-resistant purposes. Any thinking there as to why more of them aren't talking about Monero? Is it just as simple as they're invested in Bitcoin, number go up, they got their bags, or?
Yeah, that's probably that. I think, especially if they've been in it for a while, I just think if kind of most of their, their wealth or whatever that word means to people is in Bitcoin, they're kind of set that way. And so, people only have so much energy and attention span to do more than one thing. But there also is the social stigma. It's stupid, but there's lots of Bitcoiners who love Monero, public people like, I can think of one person who is a Bitcoin whale, who is very well known in Bitcoin, very privacy centric, but doesn't talk about Monero, but he loves Monero. Like, he is avid fan. I'm sure he's contributed probably lots of code. I'm sure he's made some big donations in Monero. I'm pretty darn sure of that, but just doesn't talk about it because the stupid culture. And he's kind of, he just decides that he's time better spent talking about Bitcoin rather than having to fight some other battle publicly about Monero, and he can just contribute to Monero without saying much. So I guess you just have to pick your battles. That's the only thing I can think of.
Do you see that changing? I mean, obviously, right? Even I feel like you represent that realm, right? So you're in a group. Your tent is the Bitcoiners, the privacy Bitcoiners, and now they're getting into Monero. Do you see that tent growing?
I see it. Yeah, I see it's becoming more acceptable to talk about Monero, and I think this is probably a good thing in Bitcoin. We're starting to see as new people come in because of Ordinals. I think you're having a more diverse crowd. I think as the number go up, people sort of they've been shown to be wrong about so many things. So I do think it will be more socially acceptable for these, Bitcoin privacy people to get into Monero. Yeah, I think that's going to be more acceptable, but not to be too negative. But there's some Bitcoin privacy people who actually, turns out, really don't care about privacy as much as they thought they did or say they do. And you've seen that with Samourai. Now, Samourai they're funny guys. They like to make people upset. Like they're thick skinned and they have no problem, right, mixing it up with people. That's why I like them. But you've seen a lot of people fight Samourai, and you're like, what is this? And these are like, quote unquote, the privacy guys. Bitcoin is censorship resistant, like a lot of them, and they hate Samourai. And and some of that is because they invested in Wasabi, which is supposedly another, CoinJoin implementation that's broken. It's terrible. But I think a lot of people simply invested in that. And so to answer your question,
Wasabi versus Samourai thing, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead though, to answer my question.
Yeah. So to answer your question, yes, I think it's becoming more acceptable for Bitcoiners to get into Monero and talk about it. That's one thing. But then there's also just the fact that people who said they were about privacy ultimately aren't. They're more about their investment in different alternatives to Samourai, and they're more invested in kind of their image. Yeah.
People are just people at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. We all fall short of our own expectations. I mean, we're all human, right?
So Satoshi saw all this coming down the line for sure. He's playing into all this greed that everybody has.
Yeah, right? It's as Bitcoin, has it suffered from its own success? I would say yes. It's hard to care about, at a certain point. I think a lot of, Bitcoin whales at a certain point, it's kind of like it's hard for them to have privacy, because you get to a certain point, it becomes hard in a sense. Unless you've been very careful with things along the way, I think it just becomes very hard. And you don't want to make yourself a target. And so they're just kind of like, I'm not going to engage in this.
And like we said before, the number go up thing, it's like people essentially sell out, right? It's like they cared about privacy, but when they see their dollar value keep going up in Bitcoin terms, they no longer really care about it as much, right? Because they're like, well, I'm getting my freedom through my wealth. I don't need it to be private. Which I think is short-term thinking, right? It's not adversarial thinking either, because ultimately, the real value comes from people not being able to take your wealth, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think when you get comfortable, like anything, like if you're comfortable, you become less of a warrior, less of an advocate, less of a fighter, because you have a good life, and you don't want to risk your good, pleasant life. And so why get into this big fight and put yourself out there, because your life is so great, and you have your boat and your house and all the stuff that you have. That could be it too. I don't know.
Who was it that somebody posted some good questions? Oh, it was on Untraceable, right? Posted some good questions that you had asked. I think we actually kind of covered most of them. What is Bitcoin's value? About the issues with the censorship resistance. We definitely covered that. He's asking, what do you think? What would you say is your greatest criticism or criticisms of Monero?
I think it's lack of greater adoption. I think is its weakness. I mean, ultimately, you got to have adoption as a method of payment. That's the practical thing I think of Monero is that.
Okay, it's liquidity essentially.
Yeah, it's liquidity. Now it's getting better, right? With BTC Pay server, and it's becoming easier to do that. But that's what I would like to see. And this is where Bitcoiners, they don't like it. Like Finney Forum, like I've talked to a couple different like Bitcoin like meetup groups, and just call it Bitcoin social groups, I would say, and say, hey, like, do you want to be a sponsor? Do you want to be a partner? Speak or this or that. And a lot of them say no because we have Monero.
There you go. Right.
We talk about Monero. It's the same thing with Bare Arms and Bitcoin. We have Monero. And so it just shows like the damage they can do, because they don't want Monero to be a method of payment, right? Like they don't like that we accept Monero for our ticket sales. And so to answer the question, I think lack of greater, adoption is its biggest weak point right now. And there's nothing wrong with Monero itself, the protocol, right? It's just the state of things.
Yeah, for sure. Which ties into Untraceable's other question, which is, what do you think of this idea of Monero being delisted from centralized exchanges? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's a great question. I generally think that it is a bad thing, in the sense that most people use centralized services, at least for any large amounts. It's easier to get smaller amounts without having to do the centralized services, but for larger amounts, it's harder. And so I think in the short term, it keeps Monero out of the hands of more users, plain and simple, just the convenience. The counter argument to that, though, is that it keeps the ethos of Monero with people who want to use it, and it doesn't like get distracted. People don't get in Monero for the wrong reasons. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag there. I would prefer that it doesn't get delisted. I know people say it's a Streisand effect, but I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah. I mean, it could definitely hurt liquidity initially, right? I mean, I guess the positive arguments are that you're using crypto the way you should be using it, right? There's definitely no KYC AML if you can't go onto a centralized exchange to get it. So then you're obtaining it in the best way possible, and then just using it, not necessarily just using it as an investment. So,
but maybe more people are mining. If they're like, well, it's harder to get centralized exchange, and they're like, I'll mine it. That's one more way to get it. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because the state is going to come after Monero eventually. I mean, there's a reason why they haven't been more aggressive. And I think it's going to come. So then we'll really see, was delisting it good or bad? Like, did it prepare the community for something? Like, did it stave that off? And so we're already prepared for it.
Right. And like we said, there's these other bridges being built, unstoppable, but like atomic swaps, decentralized exchanges. Is Samourai going to be presenting at Finney Forum?
He's trying to. Luke Parker. Yeah, thanks for bringing Luke up. Yeah, really glad that Luke's going to be a speaker. I don't think he's decided if he's going to talk about it yet. I'm kind of leaving that up to him based on how far along it is.
He's got a lot to talk about. He could also talk about full membership proofs, right? He's working on that as well.
Yeah, that's why Luke asked me, well, what should I talk on? I'm like, whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. You're the boss, man. You tell us.
Yeah, if you're going to fly out to if you're going to fly out to Dallas, like the mic's yours, just keep it at 20 minutes. So
he's a phenom, that kid. He's amazing.
Yeah, big brain. But yeah, like Deverick Apollo, he's going to be a speaker. He's helped, I think, with BTC Pay Server, and
nice.
Okay. Yeah, so he's going to be on there. And just scrolling through another one like Evgeny Poboreskin, he's behind the privacy messaging app. And then we're trying to get some more Monero people out there. So hopefully this podcast will attract more of the Monero tribe. You have a big following. So hopefully more of the Monero crazy people will come and get a few more of those speakers on board.
I think you'll see that happen for sure. We got to get you in return to come to Monerotopia, man. We need you to return the favor. And
yeah. So when is the next one? I know the last one was in Mexico. What's the plan? Do you guys have a date? I haven't been keeping up to date on things.
We are thinking, because we haven't officially announced anything yet. We're thinking of doing it in Buenos Aires, Argentina, a year from now, essentially. And then that separates us from MoneroCon because they do theirs in June. We've been doing ours in like May, which is right next to there. So kind of moves us 6 months away from MoneroCon. And then it'll be summer down in Buenos Aires during that time, which should be nice. And then we have Malay over there, which I'm sure you're aware of. And there's a lot of energy there right now. There's a lot of natural, organic Monero adoption that's taking place. I think I had reached out to you, right, to try to get Alessandro perhaps as being a speaker at Finney Forum, the young kid who's starting Monero Town in Ibarrete in Argentina. So yeah, we're thinking of doing Monerotopia down there in a year, which would be cool.
That would be very interesting, especially with the new president there. See where things will go. Yeah, that'll be interesting.
It's a far flight, though. That's the thing, right?
It's pretty far. People don't understand.
I feel like a lot of people just want to, who haven't been down there are just need that final little push to go because they want to go, they want to check it out. So maybe this will be their excuse to go check it out. Buenos Aires, have you ever been to Buenos Aires?
No, I've gone to Chile many times, but never made it over Argentina. I've had a few Argentine friends, but just didn't make it there.
Yeah,
want to.
Beautiful. Yeah, the food is amazing. The steak, the wine.
Yeah,
it's just the culture. It's good people. And the cash culture is amazing there. I mean, it is. Obviously, things are going to be changing now, but the current because of the fiat being so dismal down there, that people basically live in a black market economy. So it's kind of exciting to see because you're witnessing a true black market economy, and actually that might actually see that go away. Ironically, even though Malay is extreme libertarian, but in his efforts to fix things, it may become less necessary to have the black market down there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because it's, he's the new president, but then you're always going against the bureaucrats and the banks. And so, we'll see. El Salvador, I mean, he was the president there. I mean, he's been very influential, was able to do a lot. So maybe he will. I mean, Argentina seems like it's right for this kind of thing. So hopefully, I mean, like you said, it's a big cash economy. It seems like a natural fit for Monero. Yeah, it'd be a great excuse to go down there. I mean, the climate as well. I mean, there's so many good things. Just the flight. I think if it was closer, a lot more people who would normally go to Europe would go to Argentina instead. Like I would rather go to Argentina. I've been to Europe plenty of times. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's far. New York is like 11 hours. I don't know where you're coming from. Well, you're Texas, right?
Yeah, Texas right now. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, man. Is there any other information you want to put out there with regards? I guess let's first say crypto in general. Any info you want to get out there?
No, I mean, I think this has been good. I appreciate you guys, being a partner at Finney Forum, and so finneyforum.com. Just throw out the date again. So March 15th and 16th in Dallas. So that'll be a good conversation there to talk about everything. Meet other folks there that I know only via Twitter. But yeah, I appreciate having me on and spreading the word. And yeah, I think overall, my message would be that things are moving in the right direction in Monero, the right direction in Bitcoin. I think We're coming to a very interesting time where the state is really cracking down now. And we're going to have these populist revolts in Argentina and some other places. And I think the world is going to get really crazy next year with the presidential election in the US. So buckle up, I think, and be prepared.
Hold those Monero.
Hodl Monero, stack Monero.
You might want to go boating too, right? You might want to take up the hobby of boating as well. What would you say to somebody who is in crypto? Maybe they're like a Bitcoiner getting interested in Monero, but they are concerned about the fact that it might be banned, or they're concerned that it is a target. What would be your message to those people?
I would say if you're afraid of that, that's a reason to use Monero. And I would say as of today, it's not illegal to own Monero or use it. So like, don't be a baby. Like,
I love it. So true, right? Like if you're here and you're here for the right reasons, then you should want to use Monero at that point, right? Otherwise, you're probably here for the wrong reasons, right?
Yeah, it's like, come on. Like, think of our ancestors and what they've done. Like, talk about weak generation. So yeah, so people are afraid of Monero. Don't be. That's ridiculous. It's legal, and if you think it's going to be banned, that's more of a reason to have it. Because why would they, if it was such a powerful tool, right? When like the government says ban this, sometimes there's a good reason for it, but sometimes it's not. So, Monero is a friendly place. It's not that hard to get. It's easy to use. Great wallets. You can mine it at home. Like, go for it. Don't overthink it.
All right, Ragnar, man, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Yeah, Douglas, I'm glad we got to do this, and we'll see you in March if we don't also see each other on Twitter before then.
Cheers, buddy.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. We release new episodes every week. You can find and subscribe to our show on YouTube, Odyssey, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Go to monerotalk.live to subscribe for a full list of places where you can watch and listen. If you want to interact with us, guests, or other podcast listeners, you can follow us on Twitter. And please leave us a review on iTunes. It helps people find the show, and we are always happy to read them. So thanks so much, and we look forward to being back next week.